are you? How'd you get here?
My name is Inigo Montoya, and your generation is killing my family and friends. I have come to you with what you would consider using advanced artificial intelligence mixed with virtual reality. It has become quite commonplace in my time. What you are really seeing is a hyper-real hologram that can enjoy the pleasures of flesh-like cheeseburgers with a large fryer and an orange crush.
But why are you here? How am I killing your family and friends? Should I prepare to die?
No, you fool. I'm preparing to die because of you and your people. I'm here to help you see the error of your ways and inspire you to change. You and your people are killing my people through a myriad of ways. However, I think I can simplify it so it isn't overwhelming. No, don't freak out or poop your pants because this stuff is crazy scary.
That isn't reassuring at all. You might want to check your compassionate setting, robot man.
I am not a robot. I am merely a being from the future transported through time to warn you so that my people can live. Anyhow, as I was saying, you are our last hope, or sort of. And I don't want you to relax because that is what's got us into this disaster.
Okay, I'll listen.
So I come from the year 2078.
Well, that is forever away.
Please try not to interrupt. My message is important.
Wait just a moment. How are humans dying out?
Listen, and I will explain. It is all because of human-caused climate change. Earth is simply becoming uninhabitable for our kind.
Inconceivable. As of right now, we are at the peak of our powers. Technology is developing like never before. I mean, we have self-driving cars. Wait, isn't that a cause of our decline? Because I hear that we are finding new treatments for cancer every year. So I'm sure that won't be a problem in 60 years.
You're right about two things. You are at the peak of your powers now, and yes, cancer is not as big of a deal where I'm from. However, you're wrong about two things. One, you only think you have self-driving cars. Second, climate change is not inconceivable. There are warning signs all around you, but the right people are not paying attention.
What sound are you talking about? I never really cared much for that movie, by the way.
You didn't like that movie? What is wrong with you? Never mind. I'll deal with that information later. As for the signs, where to begin? Do you notice how it seems to be hotter every year?
Yeah, but I was told that is normal. And it could be caused by sunspots, or it could be a natural part of the Earth's cycle.
You've been fed lies. This increase in average temperature is not normal. You know who tried to tell you it isn't normal?
Who, and how do you know they aren't lying?
The IPCC tried to warn you. In a report from 2018, the IPCC stated very clearly what will happen if nothing is done to combat the massive amounts of CO2 being pumped into the atmosphere. To answer your second question, they have no reason to lie to you. The IPCC is a large organization of scientists who come together to decide just how bad the future looks if nothing is done about climate change. They are not paid for putting out this report. All they want to do is tell us the truth about climate change.
Okay, so the IPCC sounds pretty official. What are they saying about temperatures rising?
In the 2018 report, they ran 40 scenarios to see what the future would look like. Then they broke down the outcomes of those scenarios into two possible outcomes. First was a simple extreme, and the second was a complex extreme. I'll stick to the simple extreme in order not to overwhelm you. In the simple extreme, they predict that in the future, there'll be more hot days, higher minimal temperatures, and a ton more rain.
Okay, that doesn't sound too bad. I mean, I don't care too much for the winter time, and the summertime I'm happy to stay inside and play video games and watch Netflix.
I'm with you on not loving the cold weather and enjoying a nice summer day inside or at the lake. However, these changes have massive implications, and I think you'll be interested on what these changes are.
So what are the changes?
Buckle up, buddy. So one that you should be interested in that is dramatically affecting my parents is the increase in temperature caused serious problems for the elderly, i.e. death.
First, we aren't buddies because buddies don't give bad news, like you. Second, why would I care about a bunch of old people dying in your time?
Think for a second, Jackson. I'm from the year 2078, and you were born in 2000. So how old will you be once you've reached my time?
I see what you're saying, my man. Damn. Anyway, continue.
I'm glad you've caught up. As I was saying, the changes come from temperature increases are less than ideal. Another sucky result you might be interested in, the coast will be in a world gone.
What happened to the coast?
You can say bye to your precious Miami, California beaches, and many islands.
No, not Miami. And the only place worth living in California.
That is correct. Because of massive rises in temperatures, people have had to get desperate. Not a lot of people live in northern Canada and Siberia, and will never know the wonder of sand beneath their feet enjoying a wonderful taco, because those places do not exist. Simply because it is too hot to live there and food will no longer grow in those areas.
I don't want to live in northern Canada or Siberia.
I know, man, it's rough. Aside from the crappy stuff happening to humans, animals are hit hard too.
Which animals are hit hard?
Well, there are a lot that suffer, but I'll stick with one: walruses.
Walruses. Why walruses?
For one, they are incredibly important to the ocean's ecosystem, and they are really funny animals. So walruses travel and mate primarily on sea ice. But since it is really hot in the future, there is little sea ice left. And at different times in the year, there is no sea ice. This has left walruses nowhere to mate and has resulted in their near extinction.
Whoa, I never thought that would happen to cold weather animals. I bet a lot of types of those animals are having a tough go at it.
Yeah, man. Arctic animals are struggling, and are so many other animals because their habitats have decimated.
So if it sounds really bad and stuff, but how can you be so sure these problems are from humans? Can't the problems from volcanoes are caused by aliens?
That would be a much more convenient truth, wouldn't it? But the answer is a responding no. Let me tell you why. Or better yet, let my smarter friend from the future tell you why.
So two things you need to understand here are isotopes and how they're used to understand human and non-human climate change. Now stay with me here because this isn't super simple at first. However, I think I can break this down so it makes sense. So an isotope is a flavor of an element that has a different number of neutrons. For example, take plain vanilla flavored ice cream. Plain vanilla flavored ice cream is the basis of all vanilla ice cream flavors. However, plain vanilla flavored ice cream doesn't meet all the needs for vanilla ice cream eaters. Therefore, to serve a greater audience of vanilla ice cream fans, vanilla ice cream wants to diversify. This has led to vanilla taking on flavors like vanilla bean or caramel swirl. At its core, vanilla bean and caramel vanilla ice cream are essentially plain vanilla flavored ice cream, but not exactly the same. And this is what an isotope of an element is. The isotope is slightly different, but still maintains a core of where it comes from. An example of an element that has broken up into different vanilla flavors is carbon. The most common flavor of carbon are carbon-12 and carbon-14. Carbon-12 is the plain vanilla flavored ice cream because it is desired by most forms of life on Earth. Carbon-13 is the vanilla bean flavor and is light, but not as much as carbon-12 because it is not as versatile as since there is another flavor attached to it. And carbon-14 is the caramel swirl flavor. While caramel swirl vanilla ice cream is delicious, it is not as versatile as the other two flavors when making a sundae. Does this make sense so far?
Yeah, I think so. So an isotope is basically an element that didn't want to copy its older brother and blaze a path of its own?
Essentially, yes. Now on to how isotopes help explain human-caused climate change. So part of the atmosphere is filled with CO2 or carbon dioxide. CO2 plays a main role in keeping Earth warm because it interacts with other gases which combine to make greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases create a greenhouse effect. Because our Earth has greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it is able to trap energy, which provides a warming effect for the Earth. However, too much CO2 in the atmosphere and the Earth gets too hot, and too little, and the Earth becomes too cold for advanced life to live. Maintaining proper CO2 levels is imperative to sustaining life on Earth. Scientists have known these facts about CO2 for a while, and they started tracking how much CO2 is in the atmosphere and how it has changed over time. Since 1958, scientists have seen CO2 levels rise from 315 parts per million to 409 parts per million. This dramatic increase in CO2 levels is one of the indicators that tells us climate change is human caused. The other key indicator is the type of CO2 we are seeing in the atmosphere. Remember isotopes and how one element can have different isotopes?
Yeah, I remember isotopes.
Okay. Remember with isotopes how there are different flavors. By far the most desirable carbon flavor for life is carbon-12 because it is really easy for life to work with. If life has a choice and carbon-12 is at the ice cream bar, it is choosing carbon-12. However, if carbon-12 is not available, life will settle for carbon-13 or carbon-14. Here's an example. Imagine in the atmosphere there is a bunch of carbon frolicking around. There is some carbon-12, some carbon-13, and carbon-14. And on Earth, there is some really hungry plankton or other carbon-eating plants. This plankton needs carbon to survive. It really prefers to eat carbon-12. However, it will eat carbon-13 or carbon-14 too in order to survive. So what it does is it will eat all the different flavors of carbon and take that carbon out of the atmosphere, and when it dies, it buries the carbon it ate in the ground. Then what happens to the carbon in the ground is important. Carbon-12 will store in the ground forever because it is stable. Because carbon-12 preserves in the ground forever, scientists are able to track CO2 levels by measuring carbon-12 isotope levels from hundreds of thousands of years. However, carbon-14 will decay in the ground because it is radioactive, and carbon-13 is absorbed by different sediments. And over time, carbon-12 is buried deeper and deeper until it is released. It can be released in two ways. First, by volcanoes erupting and spewing it back into the atmosphere. Second, by humans putting it back in the atmosphere in the form of CO2 emissions. Because they're from buried dead plants and algae, when humans burn fossil fuels, they release a lot of carbon-12. Now to explain how climate change is human caused. I'll first start with how we know climate change is not naturally caused. If climate change was naturally caused, then we would expect to see CO2 levels go through natural rotations. There were some periods of extremes during the mass extinction periods, but for the most part, they were all about the same. However, scientists have not seen this recently, not until the 1950s, when humans began to use nuclear bombs, burn fossil fuel, natural gas, and oil, did scientists begin to see CO2 levels rise above 300 parts per million. And here are how scientists know climate change is human caused. First and foremost, this CO2 in the atmosphere has a different composition than it did 100 years ago. Since 1900, scientists have seen a decrease in the ratio of carbon-14 in the atmosphere. And this is strange because the carbon-14 replenishes itself in the atmosphere, unlike how it decays in the ground. This change, the percentage of carbon-14 in the atmosphere, is due to humans. And since the Industrial Revolution, humans have been pumping carbon-12 and some carbon-13 out of the ground and put it back into the atmosphere in the form of CO2 in order to harvest energy. As more carbon-12 rich CO2 is pumped into the atmosphere, the percentage of carbon-14 and carbon-13 decreases. This is not because carbon-14 and carbon-13 go away, but because the ratio has been shifted to include more carbon-12. Do you follow me?
So if I understand you correctly, we know climate change is human caused for a couple reasons. First, it cannot be from nature, or else we would have seen CO2 levels remain around the same as they have been for hundreds of thousands of years. With some extremes, second, we know that humans because it is humans because it wasn't until humans started putting CO2 in the atmosphere that we saw a drastic change in CO2 levels in the atmosphere. Is that right?
That is perfect. Without human interaction, the science behind these increases in CO2 do not work.
So I have one question though. What does CO2 have to do with climate change again?
I'll let Inigo answer this one.
I'm glad you asked. Remember how my friend said CO2 helps keep the earth warm? Well, as CO2 levels rise, we see a rise in temperature too, because less and less energy is able to escape the atmosphere and return to space. This is due to the greenhouse effect we talked about earlier. We need the greenhouse effect, or else Earth would be an ice ball. However, too much CO2 means increases in temperature. This is what happened to my people.
Okay, so there's a correlation between high CO2 and high temperature levels? Because that's the greenhouse effect.
Exactly. Because humans have been pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere, Temperatures have gone up because the more CO2 in the atmosphere, the hotter it gets, because the greenhouse effect intensifies. This is why I need your help to fix this problem. We have lost precious life due to flooding, drought, famine, and overcrowding.
Oh man, I don't know what to say except I'm sorry.
You don't need to feel only sorry. You can be the change me and my people need.
What do you mean? I'm only one person.
A young person who's interested in engineering, right?
Yeah, so?
I was a bit misleading earlier with my introduction. I claimed I came back to inspire you. While I do want to inspire you, I also have a solution. You see, my people have figured out how to perform carbon capture. Carbon capture is the key to lowering CO2 levels and maintain temperatures so humans can continue to live and thrive on this planet.
What is carbon capture and how does it involve me?
Carbon capture is the process of removing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in the ground. As you know, when less CO2 is in the atmosphere, the greenhouse effect is lower, which makes our planet cooler. And this is exactly what we need. You come in because you have an incredible aptitude for engineering, and you can take the intelligence my generation has gained and use it now.
So, how do I do this?
Come close and I'll whisper it in your ear.
Yeah, okay. What if I forget this?
Oh, don't worry. I'll share it with you using the airdrop.
A lot has been made during my time, whether intelligence is an evolutionary advantage. The brightest minds of my generation, like Andy the Enormous, Reese Cupp, Eastley, and Savini, have all struggled with this question. I propose to you that intelligence is an evolutionary advantage. Without our intelligence, humans do not rise to their current status. Without intelligence, the valuable research which has been done on climate change would never happen. It is true we created the problem of climate change. However, if the history of our planet has taught us anything, massive extinction is bound to happen. But because of our intelligence, we are the first species that will be able to divert our extinction. But you need to act now.